I'm privileged to be able to do what I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm privileged to introduce Lee Habib. And I've gotten to know Lee a little bit over the last few months, actually almost a year now. And he's an extraordinary guy. He's got a vision. And so few people have an actual vision of what they want to do. And his vision is to take regular stories of Americana, some which you know, some which you don't, tell those stories, make them accessible, and make them so people can then, through those stories, have a better sense of who they are and where they fit into the American story. It's an extraordinary mission. He's got his radio program, Our American Stories, is in 461 radio stations. It's the 10th largest radio show in the nation, gets extensive reach, and he came to us and he said, Rick, I want to do something with the libraries. And I said, let's talk about it, and we kind of went back and forth. And so what I want you guys to think of as he's making his presentation, and please share this with me anytime or send an email to us, because this is really important. Think about, how can I use this? How can I make this a tool that in my toolbox to increase literacy, increase interest, increase curiosity with the people who I serve? They can be adults, they can be children. They can be women, they can be men, it doesn't matter. How do I increase curiosity? How do I cement my position as the actual fabric of our small communities, which is really the position you hold as librarians? You're the fabric of the community. You're the place they go when there's an emergency. You're the place when people go when they need knowledge. You're the place that holds many small communities. It's the one place where everybody can come together. And our goal here is to equip you. So when you listen to Lee, and you're going to be blown away by this, okay? When you hear this presentation, understand, this is a man who's put 10 years, a decade of his life putting this together. He owns the copyrights. So it provides tremendous opportunities for you to be able to take what he's done and to tell us how to translate it into your needs. So with that, I did more of a talk rather than an introduction, but when you hear this guy, you'll be blown away. He is the most enthusiastic speaker I think I've heard since I was babbling at somebody out in the back, out in front, about something I cared about. He's an amazing guy. He's a visionary. He's dedicated his life to putting a vision together, of bringing America together through America's stories and Americana. And with that, please welcome Lee Habib.
And thank you all. Just a quick note before I get into the speech. My dad was a high school history teacher, and his idea of a fun trip was starting at Gettysburg, going to the Rosa Parks Museum, and ending in Vicksburg. And I was the only son who cared for that. The others got dragged along, but I loved it. I fell in love particularly with the book. And my local librarian, I just hounded my local librarian because I wanted the new book rack, which would come out. I wanted the list, and I would be there. I would literally ask my dad for the morning excuse of being sick so I'd get to the library and get to the new books before everybody else. I don't know if you remember those days with the new book rack, but I wanted the new book. I didn't care what the book was, by the way. I just wanted to read the new book. So I was just a curious kid, and the library, well, it just extended my curiosity beyond all imagination. So before I tell some great American stories to celebrate our 250th, I wanted to share a story about my own family, and I did just a bit there. I'm the son of a high school history teacher and basketball coach who became a superintendent of schools. My mom worked at the college I attended. By the way, I'm telling you this story because what I focus on with everything we do are origin stories. The origin story of a family, of a business, of a town, of a state, of a country. My mother's parents on both sides were Italian. My father's were Lebanese and Swiss German. My wife is part French, Irish, American Indian, and Viking, which means my daughter is a walking United Nations. She's an Arab, Italian, Swiss German, French, Irish, Indian, Viking, and get this, she's a cowgirl to boot. And that's, of course, because she lives in Texas now. And we know Texas is a nation of its own. She's the pluribus, my daughter, in e pluribus unum, that beautiful Latin phrase from the many one. Part of what makes America so special are those three words. And what makes that possible is the fact that we were birthed by an idea, built on an idea. Immigrant families like mine and many of yours have come here for centuries because of that idea, to become a part of that idea. My grandparents on both sides love this country. My Italian grandfather lost his only son in World War II. The uncle I never met, the uncle I never knew. Always a flag was flown at the front of both of their homes. My Lebanese grandparents were not thrilled their son had fallen in love with an Italian girl. They wanted, of course, a Lebanese boy. And my Italian grandparents were hoping their daughter would marry an Italian boy, or at least a Catholic boy. My mom loved the church. My dad wasn't very religious, but they ignored their differences and their parents' wishes, and they got married anyway. They had 4 kids and enjoyed 56 years of marriage and watched their parents fall in love with their Italian Lebanese grandkids. Love overcame differences in my family and preferences, and yes, prejudices. How we live and love in this country is simply extraordinary. And this, I can sense with all of you, is true in your own family's lives. If you go back through your DNA and your heritage, I think you'll be so surprised. If you haven't done one of those 23andMe's, do it. It's staggering what you learn about yourself. So 250 years ago, as we were debating about getting a divorce from a king, and the claim in the Declaration of Independence was what the war was over, that our rights spring from our Creator, not kings, from God, not government. That claim and what to do about it, it bitterly divided our nation. A third of the country was for a war of independence, a third were against, and a third were on the fence. Americans rightfully worried. The notion that our ragtag army could beat the mighty British Army and Navy was, let's just call it a stretch. If there was a betting line in Las Vegas in 1776, a DraftKings, America would have been a huge underdog. Ever since we've been an underdog nation, attracting people from around the world to start their own underdog stories, their own American dream stories. The stories you're about to hear represent the best of America and the best origin stories from the national show I host, Our American Stories. Here's the first, and it's my favorite, so I lead with it. And I learned this one doing one of those tours with my dad and visiting the Rosedale Plantation in Louisiana. It's a great overcoming story. Madam C.J. Walker's story was told to us, by the way, by her great-great-granddaughter, A'Lelia Bundles, author of On Her Own Ground, and always we're celebrating a book and an author in every story we tell. This is the first clip from our one-hour story with Bundles talking about Madam C.J. Walker's childhood.
She started life as Sarah Breedlove on the same plantation in Delta, Louisiana, where her parents had been enslaved. And she was the first child in her family born free in December of 1867. They lived in an area that had been devastated by the Civil War. Everything, the plantations had been burned down, and now the formerly enslaved people were struggling to just live a life, and they had very little money at the end of every season. They owed money to the plantation owners who had been their former slave owners. And Sarah Breedlove, as the young child in her family, she had had very little formal education. There weren't schools for Black children in Louisiana, even though her family minister, Curtis Pollard, had been a Black state senator during Reconstruction when African Americans had gained a great deal of political power. That power was taken away from them by the Ku Klux Klan, so that by the time Sarah was old enough to go to school, there were no schools for Black children. She knows how to pick cotton, she knows how to wash clothes, she knows how to do domestic work. And then when she was 7 years old, both of her parents died.
She would endure an abusive early marriage and other tragedies. and a personal hygiene problem that many American women, particularly African American women, suffered in the day.
In 1906, most Americans didn't have indoor plumbing. That meant people didn't bathe very often, which we don't like to think about, but people would have to go outside and pump water at the well by hand, put it in a bucket, heat it on a wood stove or at an open fire, get the water hot enough to fill a big, large tin tub, and take a bath. And that might happen once a week. And everybody in the family might use the same bath water. So it's really gross. But as you can see, this would not, bathing was not the sort of luxury thing that we think about now. So most people didn't have indoor plumbing. They didn't bathe very often. They washed their hair even less often. Sometimes once a month, sometimes not at all during the winter, because you think about what that would take. If it's snowing outside, how are you going to pump the water? And Sarah was one of those women, and there were many women like her because they weren't washing their hair very often. They had really horrible scalp infections, and as a result, they were going bald. So that was really Sarah's real problem, is that she was going bald, and she wanted to figure out a way to have healthier hair.
After much trial and error, she developed her first product, and with a business partner began running newspaper ads. Instead of using her real name, she chose the name Madam C.J. Walker, a nod to her fashion peers, Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein, who also called themselves Madam. She would start beauty schools as well. In every town she visited, she'd find a woman who had a scalp infection, hire a room in a church, and demonstrate what her products could do. She was also good at picking women who had personality, many of whom were leaders in their church choirs, and who would become her sales force. That's right. Long before Mary Kay, it turns out that was Madam CJ. She traveled the nation, creating disciples wherever she went. Her ads were often testimonials from her customers and sales agents. Her ads, one I'll give you an example of. Quote, this is a woman, and one of her agents, quote, "You have made it possible for a black woman to make more money in a day selling your products than she could in a month working in somebody's kitchen." Madam Walker wasn't just selling products that made black women look more beautiful. She was selling economic independence and economic empowerment, too. One of Madam Walker's most compelling stories involved Booker T. Washington and his National Negro Business League. She wanted to be included in the 1912 conference's program, but Washington was dismissive. Sexism, it turns out, didn't know color lines. By then, her company had customers all over the United States, and Walker would not take no for an answer. Here's A'Lelia Bundles with her favorite story of her great-great-grandmother.
And on the third and final day of the conference, as the last banker was completing his report, she stood at her seat, looked toward Booker T. Washington at the podium, and said, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face. I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the washtub. From there, I was promoted to the kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself. I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and preparations, and I have built my own factory on my own ground." The next year, he invited her back as a keynote speaker.
When Walker died in 1919, she'd become the first self-made female millionaire in American history. It's a classic American story of persistence and perseverance, one we tell twice a year on the day of her birth and the day of her death on Our American Stories. The next story is the story of a national symbol. It's the story of a bird. How did a bird Benjamin Franklin once called of bad moral character, he actually thought this was a bad bird, become America's national symbol? Jack Davis, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Bald Eagle, The Improbable Journey of America's Bird, told the story to Our American Stories 2 years ago. Here's an excerpt.
So the bald eagle is truly an all-American bird when you think about it. A bird that is charismatic in its behavior and its appearance. And so it was always a stunning sight when a bald eagle crossed the sky. The bald eagle has this distinctive look. It's easy to capture its image. And as a bird as a species that's endemic to North America, and an image that really has the sense of power and strength behind it, it made sense that Americans would like it. But also, the bald eagle in its life itself represents freedom and liberty and independence. Those were qualities that Americans associated not just with their country, but with themselves. And so you have this free, independent bird of courage and strength. It was just ideal. Even though Americans loved the bald eagle image early on, they loathed the species itself, the living bird behind it. They treated the bald eagle as a predator, but they were accused. There was this myth that they were a jeopardy to American husbandry, to farmers and to livestock farmers, and to people who raise chickens in their backyards. And so it was regarded as a civic duty to shoot and kill a bald eagle. And thousands of them were shot and killed throughout the 19th century. So by the late 19th century, bald eagles had all but disappeared from eastern seaboard states. And then in 1945, DDT went on the open market. It was available to anybody to buy.
It begins with the war-born development of DDT. This diabolical weapon of modern science saved millions of humans, but killed billions of insects.
We've beaten the Japanese, we've beaten the Germans, now it's time to beat the bugs. The bald eagle population reached its nadir in 1963. A census was conducted that year, and there were fewer than 500 nesting pairs. Now, let's put that in perspective. When Congress adopted the Great Seal of the United States in 1782, the estimated bald eagle population in North America was 500,000. We redeemed ourselves later in the century by calling for its protection. And in 1972, the Environmental Protection Agency banned the sale of DDT, but also Congress in that same year passed one of the most important conservation acts in U.S. history, and that was the Clean Water Act. Through the 1980s, 90s, and on into the 21st century, we brought all these bays and bayous and sounds and lakes and rivers that were on the verge of ecological collapse around the country back to teeming life. And today, the bald eagle population in North America is estimated to be 500,000, the same as it was in 1782.
From a bird, we go to a woman who created a doll you all know. It's Ruth Handler's story. It's the story of a woman and a gamble that built the world's most famous doll. Long before Ruth Handler created Barbie, she was a girl standing behind the counter of her family's Denver deli, learning how people reveal themselves in the smallest choices they make in a retail store. She carried that intuition with her as she and her husband began building the company we now know as Mattel from scratch. This is the story of how Ruth's insight into the childhood of young girls, including her own daughter, pushed Mattel into uncertain territory and new commercial heights. Robin Gerber, author of Barbie and Ruth, shared Handler's story with us and started with the trip that inspired Handler's big idea.
Then she had an idea. She now had 2 children, a daughter named Barbara and a son named Ken. And Ruth had this idea watching Barbara play with her friends, that they really liked playing at being adults. And they could only do it with paper dolls because there were no adult actual dolls, except ones that you put on the shelf, not that you played with. Girls were meant in the 50s to play with baby dolls and train themselves to be good mothers, but not to play with adult dolls. And so Ruth had this idea in her head that little girls want to play being big girls. It was the mid-1950s. By then the family was doing quite well financially, although they were not the top toy company, and she had her eyes on being that. But they took a trip to Europe. And when they were there, they were in a toy store in Switzerland, and there was a doll that was a 12-inch, what we call a fashion doll, and it was dressed in beautiful clothes, and it's clearly an adult woman. It has breasts, and it's got this figure, and then she sees this doll. And Barbara says, I want one of those, and Ruth says, so do I. And she actually bought 3 of them, brought them back to the States, and said to her person who did the manufacturing, go to Japan, because we were making everything in Japan then. It was after World War II, and Japan was rebuilding its economy, doing manufacturing, and actually plastics were the new thing. And Japan was the best place to build anything out of plastics. They had the most sophisticated machinery. And this doll was going to require some very sophisticated molding for those little hands and feet. So a man named Jack Ryan took the doll to Japan, and they started manufacturing it. Now, all of the men at Mattel, and it was all men in the design department, said to Ruth, you are crazy. This is a stupid idea, until she came back with the actual doll.
We then learned all about Handler's appetite for risk. She'd already challenged the men in her own company, by the way, including her husband. But she also had a talent and courage on the marketing front, and of course, the advertising front. She took some big bets. Here's the next clip.
And she did one more thing. She hired the most famous public relations person in America at the time. It used to be if you bought a car, it was advertised, has good steering and has good tires. This man named Ernest Dichter was a psychologist from Austria. And he came and he said, you should be selling your products in a way that appeals to people psychologically. So if you're selling a car, you should have a beautiful woman sitting inside a convertible, so that then subliminally men are thinking, oh, I really get the woman with the car. No one had done this before Dichter came along. And lots of people were angry about it and said it was manipulation. But Ruth said the biggest corporations in the country were using him. So she hired him to do a study of would mothers buy their daughter an adult doll. And he ran the first focus groups ever in America. And he did focus groups on this. And he discovered the mothers absolutely would not buy such a doll. But their daughters went crazy for it. All toys were sold at Toy Fair, which happened once a year in March. By then, Mattel was a big enough company. They had quite a big display area. She had this gorgeous display. So they come up with this song that very much presents the doll as if she's a real girl and she's got good grooming and all these pretty clothes.
Barbie, you're beautiful. You make me feel my Barbie doll is really real. Barbie's small and so petite. Her clothes and figure look so neat. Her dancing outfit rings a bell. At parties she will cast a spell. Purses, hats, and gloves alone. And all the gadgets gals adore.
Barbie dressed for swim and fun is only $3. Her lovely fashions range from $1 to $5. Look for Barbie wherever dolls are sold.
And Dichter had said to her, here's what my research shows. If you present this doll as a teenage fashion model and tell mothers that she will help their daughters with good grooming, then you can get over their difficulties with getting this doll.
You can tell it's Mattel. It's swell.
Talk about persistence. By the way, she bet millions on TV ads back when nobody was advertising on television. So she was also a pioneer on the advertising and marketing front. From then on, major corporations were piling into television as it became more legitimate and hit more households. Stories like Handler's embody the American dream, her guts, her imagination, her talent, but most importantly, her determination and resilience are an inspiration not just to women. When I heard this story and all the men in my place, it was an inspiration to us to keep charging on how to keep thinking about marketing our own show. Up next, a great overcoming story. It's an Atlanta story. Bernie Marcus, who is the co-founder of Home Depot, and this is from his memoir, Kick Up Some Dust. He recently passed about a year and a half ago. You'll hear from Mr. Marcus himself and the obituary I wrote on his behalf for Newsweek in 2024. Bernie Marcus's family lived through the great tragedy of the Holocaust, and he started his life in America humbly. Here's Bernie telling his family's origin story, his parents' story, and why they came to America. It's the story of so many Jewish immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th century. And you're thinking the Holocaust in Germany? No, the Holocaust in Russia in the late 19th and 20th century.
I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in a tenement, fourth floor walk up with my parents, who were immigrants from Ukraine, who spoke no English. My father was a carpenter. He was a damn good carpenter, a lousy businessman. But they came here because they wanted a good life for their kid. They were running away from anti-Semitism in the Ukraine, and they didn't want that for their children. I had two brothers and a sister, and they came for freedom. They came for the right reason. And they taught us right from the beginning that this is America, the golden land. My mother used to call it in Yiddish, the golden land. And they believed it. And they wanted to be here, and they wanted to be citizens for the right reason. They saw what the other world looks like: socialism, communism, oppression, lack of freedom, and that's not what they wanted for their children. And it was a hard journey getting here. It took my father 8 years to make that trip, along with the rest of his family, and my mother likewise. So they didn't cross a border illegally. They came here through the hard way, the real way, and the honest way, and they came here to learn the language, to be American citizens. That was the key. And I'm so happy they did it, but we were poor. We had nothing. We had nothing. If my father didn't bring home money, we didn't eat. It's as simple as that. Spaghetti was a staple. Chicken soup was a staple. And we rarely saw meat or anything like that. I didn't know it. I was a kid. I just loved being around other kids like myself. All the kids in the tenement were in the same circumstances. We were all poor. And we thought about, as I would go around Newark, I saw people that lived in houses. And I remember saying to myself, when I grow up, I want to live in a house. I want to have a porch. And I wasn't envious. I just said, how did they do it? How did they manage to get where they are? And that's the story of my life, was how to better myself and not to do it at the expense of somebody. In other words, envious.
Though they had little money, his mom taught Bernie about the Jewish obligation to give, tzedakah, and you'll hear more about that later. It's an obligation she didn't think was relegated to the rich. His 5-cent allowance would often not be used for ice cream, but to give to someone in his neighborhood who needed the nickel more. After graduating from Rutgers, Bernie worked in various retail companies, eventually taking the helm at Handy Dan Home Improvement in California, when in 1978, he was fired at the age of 49. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. He rebounded quickly, starting a new venture with new partners and doing what entrepreneurs do best, solving a problem. You see, before Home Depot, weekend home improvement types spent lots of time shuffling between stores to get lumber, plumbing, and paint supplies. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was expensive, because many of those stores worked through middlemen who drove up costs for their customers. Why not put everything under one roof, cut out the middlemen, and go direct to the manufacturers and make home improvement easier, better, and more affordable for working class families. Thus, Home Depot was born right here in Atlanta. But there was more. Home Depot also demystified home improvement, staffing stores with knowledgeable salespeople who could answer shoppers' questions, and often offering free remodeling classes. My mom took one and built our basement, helping millions of American families improve their homes, improve their own American dreams. It's a heck of a story. The first 2 Home Depot stores opened in Atlanta in 1979, and by the end of 2023, there were 2,300 stores across North America with 460,000 employees and sales of $153 billion. And Home Depot is still to this day considered a top 10 place in America to work. But there's so much more to this story. Since its 1981 IPO, an investment in Home Depot is up a staggering 1,145%. And it's one of the most widely owned stocks in America. Pension funds of teachers, firemen, auto workers, truckers, nurses, as well as the 401ks of hardworking Americans across the country include Home Depot stock in their retirement portfolios. Those millions of working class shareholders, owners, are rooting for Home Depot to continue its outstanding record of serving customers. After he retired in 2002, Bernie and his bride, Billy, got to work giving away their wealth, and not just some of it, 98% of it, nearly $2.7 billion to this day. And anyone who lives in Atlanta knows what the Marcus Foundation has done for this city. It's gone to everything from building the world's greatest aquarium. That was $260 million. Bernie didn't ask for a penny from the state. And that's right here in Atlanta, and it changed a community. To Alzheimer's and autism research, to helping veterans' families' homes. He's built thousands of homes for veterans. His name's on nothing. And of course, taking care of the Jewish ancestry that he cares about so much, anti-Semitism still being a problem, as we know, in this country and around the world. Bernie credited his Jewish heritage for much of his success. Quote, "Over 2,000 years, we Jews have been oppressed in every society we've belonged. But through our wits, through our intelligence, through our brightness, through our knowledge of who we are and our God, we succeeded in every instance, no matter what the civilization, no matter what the circumstance." Bernie died at the age of 94, leaving the city he loved, Atlanta, a better place, and the country he loved, a better place too. The next story, I love music, and we do stories of songs, and this is one of my favorite songs. And so I had one of my favorite writers, a great music historian, tell it. And it's the story of a gospel song that you all know, and if you don't, you're about to. The author, by the way, is Robert Marovich. He's the author of A City Called Heaven, Chicago, and the Birth of Gospel Music. I thank him for the research. And by the way, the production here is done by our ace crew. This is Greg Hengler's work. He does absolutely beautiful work. If a funeral is taking place in a black church in America, there's a strong probability the gospel song, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," will be a part of the service. The song was written by Thomas Dorsey, who was born in a small town 40 miles west of Atlanta, one of 7 brothers and sisters. Dorsey grew up in and around the church. His dad was a Baptist preacher, his mother, the church organist. In his late teens, Dorsey left his gospel roots to try his hand at the blues, but the call of God tugged. Dorsey joined the Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago, where he directed church choirs and began composing songs of his own, over 300 in all. He was at the top of his game and about to become a father for the first time when tragedy struck. Dorsey was invited to a gospel convention in St. Louis, but he was nervous about leaving his wife, Nettie, who was days away from giving birth. But Nettie gave her husband her blessing, and on the road he went. While in St. Louis, he received a Western Union telegram that there had been complications with his wife's childbirth and that she died. Deep in grief, he raced home, where he learned his baby boy had survived. By morning, Dorsey was told by doctors that his son had not survived the night. There was a double funeral the next day, and these are the words that Dorsey told his biographer about that day. "I looked down that long aisle which led to the altar where my wife and baby lay in the same casket.
My legs got weak, my knees wouldn't work, my eyes became blind with a flood of tears. For days I closeted myself. I felt that God had done me an injustice. I didn't want to serve him anymore or write gospel songs. A friend persuaded him to leave his apartment and go out on the town for dinner at a local community center. After the meal, Dorsey wandered over to an idle piano, and he began playing variations of the melody to an old gospel classic from the late 17th century, Must Jesus Bear the Cross Alone, but adding new lyrics. He called his friend to the piano and began singing what he believed was a new song with a new title, Blessed Lord, Take My Hand. His friend, who was beside him listening, suggested a slight but profound change to what would become the title to one of the most famous gospel songs of all time. No man, call him Precious Lord. Dorsey made the switch and returned home to finish the song in less than 2 days. He debuted Take My Hand, Precious Lord at his own church's Sunday worship service. He didn't expect much of a reaction, but was shocked to see congregants rise from their seats and cry out the chorus. The song touched a deep nerve within the congregation in ways only testimony and music combined can do. Dorsey's song would become a gospel hit. Many giants in music would go on to cover the song. Sister Rosetta Tharpe in 1941.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand.
And Mahalia Jackson in 1956. Aretha Franklin would record the song on her 1972 gospel album, Amazing Grace, which would become the best-selling gospel record of all time and the best-selling album of Franklin's career.
Lord, lead me on home.
The song was a favorite of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Moments before he was assassinated in Memphis in 1968, King had a musical request for a rally later that day for his friend and sax player, Ben Branch. Play Precious Lord, play it real pretty. Those would be the last words King ever spoke. Mahalia Jackson sang the song and sang it real pretty 5 days later at King's funeral in Atlanta. Dorsey would become the first African American selected to the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. He was also inducted into the Gospel Hall of Fame and the Blues Hall of Fame.
Through the storm, through the night.
Okay, I'm going to skip one, though this is another beauty. It's a real-life story of a Rosie the Riveter, and her name is Miko Bayman. But I'm on the time constraints. I want to have enough time with Lisa. But what essentially her story was that women here in America served on the front, and that was building ships, and it was integrated for the first time. Blacks and whites working together here as women, and blacks and whites fighting overseas as well. So long before the civil rights movement, the beginnings of it, the inklings of it, were throwing people together who may not have liked each other, and particularly for whites being thrown into battle and on the front lines of manufacturing. Started in real significant ways, the beginnings of the civil rights movement. Up next, a story. Up next, a story of the Gettysburg Address, and you all know this. You all know the address, but you may not know the story behind it. And by the way, a special thanks to Gabriel Barrett. He's the author of the Gettysburg Gospel. He was the director of the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. He recently passed away, but his work lives on in his story, and I did this myself. There are a couple that I've actually performed, maybe 2 or 3%, and that's because either the author asked me to, they didn't like their voice, or they didn't think they had particular skills in presentation, or they'd passed, and then I asked the families. And always we do, every single piece we do has the thumbs up from the author. We don't run anything unless the author has approved of our work or the family's estate. So, President Abraham Lincoln arrived in the small town Gettysburg in November 18th, 1863, a day before his address. Gettysburg's population at the time was less than 3,000, but nearly 15,000 people would gather the next day at the dedication for the new National Cemetery. Lincoln arrived early because he wanted to see the battlefield. He wanted to see what he'd only seen on maps and reports. He wanted to see the ground. He wanted to walk the ground. 4 months earlier, an even larger gathering of humanity showed up in Gettysburg. General Robert E. Lee with 75,000 men, General Meade with 100,000. 3 days later, Gettysburg was the site of the worst man-made disaster in American history. Here is what a volunteer nurse from Philadelphia, Elizabeth Farnham, wrote about what she saw.
The whole town is one vast hospital. It is absolutely inconceivable, the dead and dying and wounded, torn to pieces in every way. Moans, shrieks, and prayer-filled houses. The land itself seems to wail. Sights, sounds, smells unbearable. Horror, the piles of limbs dripping blood, the dying, the dead, hell on earth.
It was a costly battle. 7,500 people had to be buried. 50,000 casualties. 9,000 horses and mules had to be buried. But it was a pivotal battle too. General Lee was hoping a loss at Gettysburg would be enough to prompt Northerners to throw Lincoln out of office in the 1864 election, and that would be it on the Civil War. Lincoln knew this too, which is why the address wasn't just a benediction. It was a rallying cry. He was telling Northern voters why the Union must prevail. Lincoln rose and he spoke just 269 words. Here's the final part of his address, provided to us by the Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum and their official Lincoln impersonator.
The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. And from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here, highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The reviews of the address ran along partisan lines. Republican press praised it. Of course, he was a Republican. Democrat press, well, they belittled it. One New York paper called it a mawkish harangue. I think they got that one wrong. In comparison to today's divides, the division in 1863 was much more profound. 600,000 Americans in a nation of 10 million died to make it a more complete union and to create the enfranchisement of African Americans as legitimate and equal citizens under the law. Next up, a light story, but a beauty, and one librarians know, and my goodness, this man's probably had more young people read his material than anybody. It's Dr. Seuss. This is the story of how Green Eggs and Ham came to be. He was born Theodore Geisel, but the world would come to know him as Dr. Seuss, who created some of the most beloved children's books of all time: Cat in the Hat, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Lorax, and more. But his best-selling children's book of all time was Green Eggs and Ham. It was birthed not by the creative urge, but by a bet, by a challenge. Here is Brian Jones, author of Becoming Dr. Seuss, with the story.
One of my favorite stories about one of his later books is Green Eggs and Ham. Because Green Eggs and Ham comes about as a result of a bet between Seuss and his editor at Random House, Bennett Cerf. And Bennett Cerf loves the Cat in the Hat. And I mean, the Cat in the Hat is printing money, doing great. And Cerf, who adores Seuss, Bennett Cerf often talked about how there was only one real genius who worked for him at Random House, and he says that was Dr. Seuss. High praise because he was publishing Faulkner, I think, at the time, too. Bennett Cerf says to Dr. Seuss, okay, smart guy, Cat in the Hat used about 200 unique words from your word list. I'll bet you $50 you can't write a book that uses less than 50 of those words. And Seuss says, you're on. And that book becomes Green Eggs and Ham. And look at the way Green Eggs and Ham is put together. It is repetition. You don't even realize that the vocabulary is so limited because you are just constantly seeing the same words over and over again in different orders. I am Sam. Sam, I am. Do you like green eggs and ham? Would you like them with a fox? Would you like them in a box? I would not like them with a fox. I would not like them in a box. It's repetition, using those same words over and over in a really interesting way. Seuss gets it in under the wire. I think he's got 48 unique words in that book ultimately when he does it. And he later on said that Bennett Cerf didn't pay him his $50 either. but Green Eggs and Ham is written on a bet to really hamstring Seuss with a very narrow, educator-approved word list. And Seuss kills it with Green Eggs and Ham, which is still to this day the best-selling Dr. Seuss book of all time. And why not? It's punchy, it's fun, again, educator-approved word list, but you don't even realize that you're only seeing less than 50 unique words because what Seuss does with so little in that is brilliant. Keeps that book moving. Again, that's Seuss worrying about the plot propelling things forward. It's tormenting this poor guy into eating green eggs and ham. That is what's driving that plot forward. And as a student, as a reader, as a kid, you can't turn those pages fast enough to see if they're going to get him to try green eggs and ham, which he ultimately does. It is everything Seuss does well compressed down into that one single book.
Green Eggs and Ham sold over 200 million copies and counting. You can't make that up. Since its pub date in 1960, in 2020 alone, it sold 338,000 copies. And by the way, speaking to generations of children throughout the world. Geisel didn't write the book for money, as we learned, and as so many of our great entrepreneurs did too, and inventors and innovators in so many of our stories, money wasn't the inspiration, it was the challenge. It was trying to make a better life for themselves. It was a dare. Sometimes, as we learn here, a simple bet. Up next, a story for the ages, and it's a sports story for the ages. It's a love story for the ages, too. Most Americans, and by the way, this is from the book Seven Men by author Eric Metaxas. Most Americans know Jackie Robinson's story. Some know Branch Rickey's. Most Americans don't know that both men were bound not just by a common mission, but by a common belief, their belief in God. Everything started with the man who hired Robinson. Branch Rickey arrived in Brooklyn after winning 6 pennants in St. Louis, but considered his time there a failure because he couldn't get the owner to integrate the stands, let alone the baseball field. Why did Branch Rickey risk his high-profile job to do what he did in Brooklyn? Eric Metaxas explained, quote, he was a Bible-thumping Methodist who believed it was God's will that he integrate baseball and sought to intervene in the moral history of the nation as Lincoln had done. Rickey was born on a farm to religious parents. It was at Ohio Wesleyan University, where he was a baseball team captain and coach, that he encountered racism in a visceral way when black teammate Charles Thomas was refused entry into a hotel in South Bend, Indiana. Rickey convinced the manager to let Thomas stay in his room as a guest, but not without a shouting match. Rickey's memory of Thomas lying on a hotel bed, crying out, quote, it's my skin. If I could just tear it off and be like everybody else. Those words haunted Ricky. In Ricky and Robinson's first meeting, Ricky pulled out a book by Giovanni Papini called Life of Christ and read from Matthew 5:39, "Whoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Ricky then read from Matthew 5:44, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Ricky believed in the power of those words. He hired Robinson because Robinson believed in the power of those words too. Where was Robinson's faith cultivated? From his mother, who Robinson's wife Mally told us was, quote, courageous, determined, and extremely religious, and who told her children, her son especially, that they were children of God who would always be taken care of by that God. Jackie, she said, never stopped believing that. Prayer sustained Robinson during those tough times. His habit of kneeling at his bedside each night to pray was, he said, quote, the best way for me to keep out of trouble and get closer to God. And he'd often add, and hit a hard-hit ball, with a wink. Robinson hit many hard-hit balls, once batting .342 to win a league title. He retired with a .313 average and was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. Branch Rickey followed in 1967. Without the animating force of their faith, the story of Robinson and Ricky wouldn't just be incomplete, it would be incoherent. Leaving Jesus out of their story would be like leaving hamburgers out of Ray Kroc's, or leaving the law out of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's. Robinson said these words not long before he died, quote, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." One man agreed, and one life impacted was Reverend Martin Luther King, who said this about Robinson when he passed: "Without him, I would never have been able to do what I did." Robinson and Ricky, through their love of God, affected millions of lives, forever changing baseball, the national pastime, and America itself. And up next, a courage story. We love telling them, and this is a Navajo Nation story. Peter McDonald served as the president of the Navajo Code Talkers Association. He was also the first elected Navajo tribal chairman. He was also a U.S. Marine who fought in the Pacific in World War II. Here are some excerpts from a speech he gave, which he and his daughter Charity eagerly shared with our national audience, and captured in his autobiography, The Last Warrior, Peter McDonald and the Navajo Nation. In this first clip, we learned that in 1942, the U.S. military had a huge intelligence problem. Our codes kept getting broken by our enemies. Here's McDonald talking about how Navajos like him were enlisted to help.
This situation of enemy breaking code became public knowledge around January of 1942. Philip Johnson learned of this situation, so he went over to the United States Marine Corps base to talk with the Marine Corps communication officers. Why not use Navajo language as a code? Philip Johnson was not a Navajo. His parents came to the Navajo Nation late 1800 as missionaries to Navajos. So Philip Johnson grew up on the Navajo, played with Navajo kids, and learned the language. He spoke Navajo very well. So now we're talking May of 1942. 29 young Navajos bust down to San Diego. They were formed into one platoon. Well, what the United States Marine Corps and Commandant don't know is back in those days, in the 30s and 40s, it was not unusual for any one of us to put in 5 to 10 miles every day managing the livestock. And they tell us to take these animals out to a nice green pasture. If you do find a green pasture, stay out there, maybe 2 nights. Whether it's raining, dust storm, sun beating down on you, or snowing, you stay out there. And also, one of us would be carrying 22 rifle. You get hungry out there. So you shoot a rabbit, you barbecue the rabbit, that's your meal for the day. So, to these 29 young Navajos that just went through boot camp, it was like a vacation. Oh my God. A bed to sleep on with mattress, clean sheets, pillows. We didn't know there was such a thing as pillows until we got to San Diego. Also, you don't have to carry a 22 rifle to get something to eat. Just get in a chow line. What a life. They were then taken to the east side of San Diego, a top secret location.
In the next clip, we hear Mr. McDonald tell the story of his fellow Navajos' experience in the Pacific.
3 Marine Division landed on Iwo Jima, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, February 1945. Each division of the United States Marine Corps have at least 70 Navajo code talkers assigned to each division. Every landing, that's how it was. At least a dozen Navajo code talkers to hit the beach first with the first wave. So you're talking about over 200 Navajo code talkers involved on the island of Iwo. On the south side, of course, there's Mount Suribachi. Most people are familiar with that. In the center is the airstrip. On the north side, there's some little hills. Beneath one of those hills, a company of Marines was pinned down very badly. The commander of that company scribbled a message, handed to the code talker that was covering that particular unit for the front line. He then dialed another Navajo code talker down at the beach command post. Send demolition team to Hill 362B. That was the message. That message, Navajo code, took 20 seconds. After 20 seconds, the beach command post commander organized a rescue team to save that company of Marines. Over 2,000 Navajo messages the first 48 hours on Iwo Jima landing. If you do little math, that means Navajo code going through the air every minute non-stop for 48 hours. We Marines, we always used to say, just name an island, we go get it for you. That was our motto. But Major Connor said in his report, no, without Navajo code, Marines would never have taken the island of Iwo Jima.
And it's true, without the Navajo code talkers' bravery and brilliance, America's victory in the Pacific would not and could not have happened. McDonald is one of the last 2 living Navajo code talkers. Our American Stories will make sure his legacy endures, and all of those other men he served with. Each year on the day of his birth, we play his stories. Always. It's a fan favorite. Last, I close with a director, and you've seen his movies. It's a Wonderful Life is a staple for Christmas, and these are a few others. And this is a very proud part of Italian heritage, is that Mr. Capra is an Italian-American. I chose this story because it's as improbable an American story as you can imagine. This first-generation movie director and writer made many classic American films, including 3 Oscar winners: Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, and You Can't Take It With You. He also went to war. He stopped making movies completely for 5 years, hung out of B-24 Liberators to make the most important film of his life, the 7-part Why We Fight series, to boost morale on the home front during World War II. Talk about some sacrifice. In his life, if his life were turned into a movie script, people would think it too improbable to be believed. Francisco Rosario Capra, Frank Capra to movie fans around the world, was born in Palermo, Sicily in 1897, the youngest of 7 children. His parents, both devout Catholics, immigrated to America in 1903 when he was just 6 years old. 79 years later, while being honored by the American Film Institute, Capper shared a story many first-generation immigrants hold close to their hearts.
Nearly 79 years ago, I celebrated my 6th birthday in the black, dark hole of a creaking ship crammed with retching, praying, terrorized immigrants. 13 days of misery. And then the ship stopped. And my father grabbed me and carried me up the steep iron stairs to the deck. And then he shouted, "Chico, look at that." At first, all I saw was a deck full of people on their knees, crying and rejoicing. My father cried, "That's the greatest light since the Star of Bethlehem." I looked up, and there was the statue of a great lady, taller than a church steeple, holding a lamp over the land we were about to enter. And my father said, "It's the light of freedom, Chico. Remember that. Freedom." So, finally, there is something I must say to some other members of my family, and I believe that they will hear me. Mama, Papa, Big Brother Ben, Josephine, Tony, little sister Ann, remember the day we arrived at the Southern Pacific Station here in Los Angeles, and Papa and Mama kissed the ground? Look, the American Film Institute has given me its Life Achievement Award. And for that, I am thanking them and all my friends who have come here. But for America, just for living here, I kiss the ground. Thank you very much.
Capper explained in his biography the secret to his success as a storyteller. Quote, "It's simple. It's the love of people and add to simple ideals, the freedom of each individual and the equal importance of each individual." These words were not mere sentiment for Capper. They sprang from a deep well, from Capper's Catholic worldview and the ideals of the country that adopted him. Capper died at his home at the age of 94, surrounded by the people he loved. They say art mirrors life, but life sometimes mirrors art. That was Capper's hope. The headline to his New York Times obituary said it best, quote, "Frank Capra, whose films helped America keep faith in itself, is dead at 94. That's the simple goal of our American stories, help America keep faith in itself." Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lee, for sharing those wonderful stories. I'm going to just start with a couple of questions to get us started, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. If you have some questions for Lee about his program, about his stories, about how to do, use storytelling in your own communities, really anything. In your view, you tell so many amazing stories. What makes a great American story?
I think you heard it. It's overcoming life circumstances, and we all have them. And some of the more interesting ones were people who'd been born to wealthy families. I always just thought, wow, they're rich, they have it made. Oh my goodness, the problems that rich kids have, they can't be themselves. They're always living in their dad's shadow. And so the fact of the matter is, people have problems. And how do they overcome them? And sometimes they don't. Lincoln didn't overcome his. I mean, the last day of his life was the best day of his life, and then he got shot for doing what he did. He got assassinated for doing what he did, liberating, in the end, liberating African Americans into freedom. John Wilkes Booth hated that, and he killed him for it. So he was martyred on Good Friday for the cause. So our stories don't always have a happy ending, because life doesn't always have a happy ending. But living a good life, a purposeful life, is important. And also we emphasize that all of these people, men and women, were imperfect. You learn a lot about Ruth Handler's imperfections. She wished she could have been a better mom. Her business took over that. And so we cover those things too. George Washington wasn't a perfect man. But what we try and do is what David McCullough had told our team when he had a little council with us at a historians meeting and storyteller meeting. He said, just remember that the people living when they lived didn't know what we know now. Don't judge them out of context. It's a mean and wretched thing to do to human beings. And don't burnish it up. Show their flaws, because then their triumphs have more meaning, and we can see ourselves in those stories. I would add this, because I often hear, I want to be able to see myself in the story, and so people would often throw Lebanese stories at me. But the stories that resonated the most to me weren't resonated because of a person was Lebanese. It was because I saw something in their character I wanted to imitate. And so Dean Smith was a poster on my wall. He was a Southern basketball coach. And there was my favorite writer of all time, Richard Ford. His picture was there. I wanted to be like him. I had nothing in common with his heritage, but I had a lot in common with his character. And I had a lot in common with what he wanted to accomplish. And of course, George Washington was my biggest hero. And I have nothing in common with this man, nothing. But what he did and what he sacrificed, I've always thought, boy, if I could sacrifice something to leave the world a better place like he did, well, that would be the best way I could live a life. And part of what I did here is in honor of so many of the people who sacrificed so much, from Washington to Martin Luther King, many of them paying with their lives, their causes. That's what I plan to do for the rest of my life. And this is a nonprofit. What we do, it is not a for-profit. And it was started from people from the center left and the center right to say, please, let's stay away from politics. Let's stay away from left versus right, up versus down, Christian versus atheist, whatever. Let's get away from the battles, and let's talk about some of the common human dimensions we have. So I think that's the common theme is, what are you going through? Which everybody's going through something right now in this room, or someone in their family is. And how do you get through it? How do you get through it? And what do we do with this suffering? Because suffering is just a constant in life. And that Take My Hand, Precious Lord, tells you what can happen and come from suffering. Something beautiful can come from suffering. It wouldn't have come without the suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty of stories, whether they're from, a well-known famous person, a historical figure or not, or just, your regular, average, everyday person. All of us have a story to tell, and you can kind of take whatever you want from that story, whether it is something common or an ideal to look up to, or how you overcame a challenge that you might be going through. That's the beauty of it.
Indeed. And to that point, about 10% of our stories come from our audience. We ask our audience to share their stories. Sometimes it's the story of their family. Sometimes it's the story of their town. Because all towns have an origin story. Towns that spring from nothing. Who started it? Why? How did it grow and develop? So the idea that we will tell the Washington story, the Duke Ellington story is my personal favorite. What Duke had to go through in his life, the segregation particularly, and the racism he encountered, and how he rose above that. But for every one of those stories, we tell the story of a lady in Mississippi who had done nothing but cleaned people's homes. And she had saved all of her money, and she was a terrific investor. She'd invested in Walmart early. And so she had $1.5 million to give away to scholarships to kids in Mississippi. And so ordinary people do extraordinary things all the time, and we celebrate those right alongside the famous folks as well.
That's amazing. Libraries are, increasingly becoming hubs for storytelling and collecting stories, particularly, we've seen during, this year celebrating 250, it's a big focus, I know, for a lot of libraries to collect community stories. Do you have any advice for librarians who are collecting these stories on the best way to do that? And what kinds of local stories should we be looking for as we're looking to collect them?
I just find people respond to prompts of some kind or another. My dad was a great teacher, and he made history come alive. And so he'd fill his wall with pictures of different types of people from different walks of life. Some astronauts, some famous people, not so famous, and some people in town. And then the kids got to choose the story that they would have to go research. And that oral history part of history was a fundamental part of their grade. And they'd have to present that history. And if there was a person, present that person or present the book. And then bring that history alive to the rest of the class. So I'd say prompts helped. Open-ended questions, people need a little direction in their storytelling. So tell a story about one person in your family who overcame, give them a little bit of instruction and maybe give 10 prompts. And I think you'll get a richer and deeper reservoir of stories because people might not know where to start. Moreover, they just might not think their story's worthy. I think this is what's most interesting. They go, well, you wouldn't want to know my story. Every time I talk to an Uber driver, I stay another 10 or 15 minutes because 8 out of 10 times they're from somewhere else. They're from Uganda. I'm meeting so many from Uganda and from Chile and Venezuela now. And it's remarkable what people go through. And it gives me a great sense of humility. But meanwhile, and a tumbling. But at the same time, they didn't think their story was worthy. So sometimes you need to just, if you know the individuals, sitting down with them and asking them, prompting them is even better. I always start with, where are your people from? Or where did you come from? And it sounds like such a banal question. But get ready, because it's about to come at you. And especially if you just listen and say, what happened next? Don't tell your story. Don't do any of that. Oh, I know what you're going through, or oh, my parents, no, none of that. Just keep asking them the follow-up. Focus on them. And then 15 minutes later, I'm leaving the Uber, or a half hour later, getting a great story.
That's great advice. I'd like to open it up for some questions from the audience. We have mics around the room, so if you have any questions. Everyone's being shy.
Thanks. Building on what you said, that everybody has imperfections except for Dolly Parton, how do you acknowledge those imperfections while still maintaining the integrity of the inspirational, uplifting part of the story? And is it ever a particular problem for you if they have really bad flaws?
Well, we do the stories about those things and the people who get them changed. We tell bad stories all the time, and hard stories. You're not going to be taken seriously by an audience if all of your stories have happy endings. And sometimes it takes a generational sacrifice to get to the next generation to get where you want to go. And almost anything that's happened that's important in America hasn't happened in 10 years or 20 years or 40 years. Women's rights movement took a very long time, but believe me, you'd read the letters of Abigail Adams and you'd say, my goodness, she had a lot of influence here. She did, and she was pushing, and she was prodding and cajoling her husband to see the women of the Revolutionary War as somehow powerless because they couldn't vote is a complete misreading. Now, it didn't mean it wasn't wrong that they shouldn't have the right to vote, but the idea that women were going to sit in those houses and be supplicants only is to misunderstand history, and to read those diaries and bring them to life is really wonderful. And if anybody was the precursor to the women's rights movement, I believe it's women like Abigail Adams. Dear goodness, read her letters, and you'll wonder who the boss in that family was. You'll have no reservations.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm from Arkansas, and we're in a Delta area. I lived in Little Rock for 20 years. I'm watching my children's lives unfurl and how they overcome their humble beginnings. I have a son that was on his way to medical school, and a very smart young man. and he developed what they call essential tremors, and his hands shake uncontrollably. Medications didn't work, so he said, screw it, I'm going to go on. He's not in medical school. He went to GW to get a public health, and he's on Capitol Hill right now. He has never taken a handicap parking sticker or any disability compensation. He doesn't want anybody's pity. One day in Walmart, someone said, man, your hands are shaking. He said, I have essential tremors. What's wrong with you? He was a young man in college, so I just admire like these people. They have overcome things, and I just want to see what he does.
Well,
Thank you.
It's a joy. It's the hardest thing as a parent. Our story on Helen Keller is heartbreaking because, you know, to keep people around her, you would look at it today and say, wow, that's child abuse or it's torture. But it wasn't. No, you're going to tie your own sneaker, Helen. And it was so hard, it would take her hours. The parents laid back because they knew that to do that for her would to take away her own power. And so in many respects, there's a sort of a look back at almost how we perhaps coddle folks and make life easier for them. And it's always amazing to me that in the world of sports and in the military, where you could see all kinds of disparities in wealth or performance. But in the military and in sports, the coaches don't say, tell me about your hardship. They'll listen to the kid's hardship. But then they got to go do the suicides, and they've got to go practice the foul shooting. And the standard of excellence never lowers on them, despite their story. And I think that one of the things that we've noticed intergenerationally, especially as we talk to some of the, like in Alelia Bundles, her biggest worry was that the bar was being lowered, as she said, on her own people. And I know as a Lebanese person, constantly I was being asked to check a Lebanese box to get into law school, which I found so highly insulting that if I had told my parents, they would have come in and beaten the guidance counselor. Because they literally, they would have beaten them because they said, no, you are an equal to the Caucasian kids. And you're going to get the LSAT or you're not going. And so I think these are important discussions to have, not political discussions. These are personal discussions of how do we maintain a standard for our kids. I think the joy of storytelling, an interesting sidebar in George Washington. Look, he owned slaves, we know that, a tragic part of his story. But here are the heroic parts of the story. I mean, he surrendered his commission after he won a war. Now, this had never been done before. And generally, when conquering heroes win wars, they become the dictator. And of course, the American people loved George. They said, be the dictator. He said, I don't want to be the dictator. It's pretty remarkable. He goes back home to Mount Vernon to just, well, return to his life. He left his home for 7 years. One of the richest men in the country left home for 7 years and put himself in harm's way in every battle. And he surrenders his commission. He leaves power. And he formed a thing called the Cincinnatus Club. And the Cincinnatus Club is named after Cincinnatus, this Roman conquering hero who didn't become dictator. He said, we want to return to a constitutional republic. Dictatorships are bad. Power like that is bad for any individual. And if he had not read about Cincinnatus, David McCullough told us this too, if he had not read that story, he wouldn't have known to surrender his commission. So sometimes stories, the biggest power they have is the imitative power. You want to be like that person in that story. That sets the standard for you. Madam C.J. Walker, Alelia Bundle said, the standard that Madam C.J. Walker set for so many African American women in terms of being able to have economic independence was something that they'd never imagined. And the stories keep coming to Alelia, and it's heartwarming. It's why she keeps pushing her mom's legacy, is that her mom just never saw herself as a victim. She saw her life as tragic, but she also saw her life as circumstances that she could overcome if she applied hard work and desire and determination. And again, those stories don't always work out. I think it's the chasing of the goal that matters more than anything else. Getting there is not the answer. It's putting the bar, setting a standard for yourself, gathering a bunch of people around you, which he did. In many of these stories, the other lesson we learn is that you're as good as the 4 friends around you. So who you choose as friends can determine your entire life.
And if you have the wrong friends, encouraging you to do the wrong things, life gets really hard. And if you choose the right ones, life can become easier. And those are human choices we make every day, in school, in our acquaintances, and in life. And that's a running theme in many of our stories, that there were these people behind the people that made the fundamental difference. None of these people will ever say they did something alone, not even close.
How do you choose which stories to include? I mean, you have so many of them, and there's so many out there.
That's a great question. The bigger the show gets, we're on 500, or about to hit 500 stations, all big cities, small cities, and we have an inbox, and in they come. And we just put them, we have buckets of stories. And so we don't like deliberately choose one. We'll spin a wheel. Because our bias might be, let's do this one, because it's our preference. But if we spin a wheel, then we go, let's dig into it. And I got to tell you, 9 out of 10 times by doing that, we surprise ourselves. And so I think that's the biggest part of our staff, is that we don't necessarily choose. We let random chance choose many of them. Now, we want to make sure we balance them across our compendium. So some will be military history, some will be entrepreneurship. Like a quarter of our stories are entrepreneurship. But I'm not just big businesses. We did a story about a lady, a Cuban lady who escaped Castro, and she owns 3 restaurants. And that's all she wants. She doesn't want to have 200 restaurants. She loves having 3, and she loves hospitality. This was her God-given gift. She's done exceedingly well, but she's very active in her church and all kinds of other activities. We treat her story as the same as Bernie Marcus's, which, by the way, Bernie was one of the donors to this. He said, I want to make sure that ethnic minorities like me know that there's a place for themselves in this country. Because Jews are, 2.5% of the country. But yet the net worth of Jews in the country is approaching about 10% of the country. So they punch above their weight. And that gives hope to people who go, well, we had problems. And Bernie will go, well, let's talk about the Jewish problem. Like 2/3 of all European Jews were murdered. Murdered. 2/3. It's an unimaginable number. And it wasn't the first time. In Russia, hundreds of thousands were killed in pogroms. And that's what his family left. Not just leaving anti-Semitism. Bernie was being kind. They were burning down villages. And because they were Jews, no other reason, because they were Jews. And they were successful. And so he saw what envy did. Envy can turn people into murderers, whether you're a Bible-believing person or not. The very first real story in the Bible that's interesting, of course, is Cain killing Abel. And why did he do it? He was jealous. He was jealous. Why did my brother get a better offering than my father, from my father than I did? And rather than listen to the father and say, hey, work a little harder, he just went ahead and killed his brother instead. Do we have family members like that? Of course we do. So envy is the disease that we really go after hard, because it's a killer. It's worse than all the others combined, envy, what it can do to a life. And what Bernie said was, I never wanted to succeed at the expense of someone else. And that's where capitalism can be bad too, because you'll sometimes succeed by stepping on someone else. And that's bad, what I call bad capitalism.
Yeah, I feel like stories, it's the same story in a different, form all throughout history, starting from the Bible all the way, all the way forward, but, slightly different players, slightly different, different aspects of it. Question over here.
Thank you for your very informative presentation. I see that you really are curating quite a collection of stories online on your .com website. And I also noticed that you're providing a subscription for individuals or people who want to subscribe to get a story a day. And I was just curious how you see libraries playing a role in participating in the Great American Stories that you're collecting, and how we can support getting those stories out to the people who are in our libraries.
Well, that's the discussion I want to start to have, because there are a lot of different aspects to what we do. We work very carefully and closely with museums around the country. We do a D-Day prayer story that's fabulous, and that comes from the FDR Museum, Presidential Library. We do National World War II Museum, the Holocaust Museum. We do Holocaust Week, and you hear from Holocaust victims. So now the question becomes, libraries are this hub, and we're trying to figure out how we can present to you these stories in digital form for you to curate, maybe pick our top 100, maybe looking for you to do stories you can send to us. As well. We're also looking at a tour with iHeart where we tour around the country to zip codes that are close enough where local librarians can come together in a mid-sized city
and we could share stories together in a public forum. So right now we're teasing with a few ideas that we could work with IMLS with and through you with. But I wanted to just get the appetite for this kind of storytelling. As you can tell, what we try and do, like in the day in the life of Dale Earnhardt, which I don't like stock, I'm not even interested in stock car racing myself. And most of the people who've listened to it say, I don't like stock car racing, but wow, that last day of his life is something. I didn't know that's how he died, and I didn't know that's how he lived. And that was a book called Earnhardt Nation, and all we did was focus on the last day he lived, because what we were hoping is one day, if that's on a placard in a library, and there it is, that audio version, that kid who's interested in gears and mechanics and automotive, and who doesn't like school, and may not want to read books, but that's the book he'll want to read. Right? And so when I see that little snippet being a QR code to our listening to it and saying, I want to read the book, it's a gateway and entrance, we hope, are shortened versions of books to say, well, you want to get the rest of the story. And I say this at the end of every story. Thank you, author. If you want to know more, go to your local library, go to Amazon and buy the book. I want the country to fall in love with books again. And I don't think that's been the kids' fault alone. I think in large part it's been the people who provide the material. And so that was a gap I was trying to fill, because the capitalist marketplace in radio didn't have an appetite for this. It was too expensive. We spent almost $20 million to date putting these stories together. Getting the intellectual property rights to Stephen Ambrose's estate is not a small thing. And then to make sure the product's distributed correctly, checked on every box, and then repeated and curated is a very difficult thing. So we were trying to figure out how we could serve, in the end, teachers, high school and elementary libraries, because there are libraries right there too, and of course the local library, which was an essential part of my dad's curriculum. The students were always being dragged regularly and routinely, being taken into the local library, at first being dragged there, but ultimately as they used the library to connect kids to their passions. A lot of the Votech kids, everybody thought didn't want to read. He threw them into the great engineering stories. The building of the Brooklyn Bridge may not have been interesting to the literary kids, but it was fascinating to the kids who wanted to build motorcycles, or the Harley-Davidson story. So there's a book for every kid, and that's what we wanted to do as we were curating. Make sure that there was a book for every adult and for every kid. And there's a kid in every adult. There just is.
That's great. And I think, hopefully, if you think of ways that your library could, work with Lee or get ideas as he's teasing out ways to work with librarians, we'll provide his contact information to you, so that way, you can all be in touch, and hopefully, who knows what will come of it. But we could make some amazing things happen, I think.
You bet.
We have time for maybe one more question, if anyone has any.
I'm going to hit up Jensen. When I think about I'm Jennifer Chilcote from Arkansas. When I think about storytelling, I think about my father's family and what great storytellers they were and are, and hopefully, carry on that tradition. But the thing that strikes me about them is how much humor there was in all of those stories, and how much bonding there was in laughing together. So just to end on a lighter note, I wonder if you can tell me some of the funnier people that you have highlighted along the way.
It's been our, for the most part, our historians aren't humorists. They have some funny episodes, but they're not necessarily the funniest people. It's been our listeners who've had the funniest stories. There's one particular storyteller in Abilene, Texas, who once a year fills and sells out a 1,000-seater 2 nights every year, and tells there's a tragic story, and then there's the funny story. And the really great storytellers know how to bounce that ball around, because if it's only funny, then it's stand-up. And then people walk away laughing, but there's no substance. And then if it's all serious, they walk away, just depressed. And so how to mix both humor, and Jay Moore is his name. We've done 15 stories to date with Jay. And his story just about stinky boots. He has one story about stinky boots. And it was a farmer in his town who just didn't know that no one liked him because his boots stink. And he didn't know that all the horse manure that picked up on it, and none of the kids told him. They just tortured him. And the Boots would sit and they would just laugh and laugh. And the kids were mean. But yet he was able to laugh after the fact, because so often humor is born out of tragedy, right? We don't laugh at the things that happen when they happen. We laugh with some time and distance after they happen. Those are always the funniest stories, right? They're the great stories. I'll leave you with that last story, because this is mine. My daughter was in the 8th grade and she was dating this boy. And one day and what I mean by dating is they would go to a movie once a week and I'd sit 3 rows above. And there was that seat between them. So one Saturday night I say, "Hey, sweetie, what movie are we going to see?" And she goes, "Oh, no, Dad, I'm not going out with Ravi anymore." I said, "Well, what happened?" She goes, "Well, he's going to go to high school. I'm homeschooled. He's going to meet a girl, and he's going to break up with me, so I'm breaking up first. I'm going to be a preemptive breakup." And I went, oh, honey, let me tell you a story. When I was a senior in high school, my girlfriend was about to go off to Rutgers, and I was going to the local commuter college. And I did the same thing. I was just so afraid she was going to leave me that about 3 months before the prom, I said, I broke up. And I made some excuse why I was breaking up with her. And then I went to my dad that Saturday night, and I said, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing tonight?" And he goes, "Well, you're not going out with Donna?" I said, "Well, Dad, I broke up with her. She's going to go to Rutgers, and she's just going to break up with me anyway, so I did a preemptive breakup." And my dad went, "You're such a loser. I'm not going out with you. It's not happening." So I tell that story to my daughter, trying to tell her that the biggest risk we take, because I love entrepreneurial stories, the biggest risk we take isn't with our capital, it's with our heart. Saying "I love you" to somebody and meaning it is the most important sentence in human history. You can't say it enough to your loved ones. And so she said, "Dad, what happened next?" I said, "She went to Rutgers and she dumped me." Now that's funny now, but it was not funny in my freshman year. So I'll leave you with that, as humor is very important.
Thank you so much, Lee,
You're welcome.
for sharing your stories.